It's been quite the year, and it always amazes me just how much one backyard garden can actually produce. But, like all good things, nothing lasts forever. For many of us, the days left to grow outside are numbered. It's just a fact of life in zones 8 or lower. But just because winter is coming doesn't mean that the growing has to stop. Those of you fortunate enough to have a greenhouse or an indoor space to grow can keep the party going all year. Some plants work better than others, and for sure there's going to be some costs involved, both fixed and variable. The question then becomes, is it worth it? So today, let's look at all the costs involved with indoor gardening. The direct price of keeping these plants growing inside when the weather outdoors no longer allows it. We want to keep cultivating, we want to keep getting these harvests, but at what cost? This video has been made possible by the good folks at Bluetti. Portable power stations like the Elite 200 V2 offer unmatched battery life in a small, compact design. Putting this guy through the paces in my now powered greenhouse was the inspiration for making this video in the first place. Check out the link for these amazing battery-powered portable power stations in the description below. No matter where you grow, plants have basic requirements that they need to thrive and produce. Air, water, nutrients, and light. Outdoors, we tend to only worry about water and nutrients. Indoors, however, we've got to take everything into consideration. Air is air, inside or out, so this one's a bit of a wash. We do have to keep an eye on that reduced air motion and reduced air circulation, as well as the inherently smaller footprint to grow, both upwards as well as out. Water is also ubiquitous, although we won't have any of those rains to rely on. And as for the nutrients, well, they don't really change from indoors to outside. The real biggies inside are going to be light and temperature, two things that we're going to have to supplement. Outdoors, the sun provides all the light and heat we need, and we plan our crops around the seasons in which they grow best. Inside, supplemental light is usually necessary, albeit less so in a greenhouse. Extra heat is also required, although less so if you're growing in your home. This is where we run into costs. In my cozy little seed hut here, I run a simple single 200-watt LED grow light, and it provides all the light and indirectly the heat that I need. During the seeding season, I run it for 16 hours a day, so the math to figure out the costs is super easy. Electric bills are always calculated in kilowatts used. That is, you have a defined value, a rate, for using 1,000 watts over an hour's time. Mine here in Victoria, British Columbia is 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Knowing this, if I run my 200-watt LED grow light for 5 hours, I'll have used 1,000 watts, a kilowatt, and it'll have cost me 10 cents. In a typical day during the seeding season, like I said, the light is on for 16 hours. So that's 16 times 200 watts equals 3.2 kilowatts, or 32 cents a day, which makes the monthly cost somewhere between $9 and $10. Now, that's just for the electricity alone and doesn't take into account the cost of the light or any of the other building materials to build said seed hut. Still, pretty simple stuff. Today, though, I'm more concerned about my greenhouse. Infinitely larger, and now we're also going to introduce the need for supplemental heat. This one's going to have a ton of variables to consider, especially if you're trying to copy any of these calculations that I'm doing here and relate them to your greenhouse at home. I can't stress this enough. The discrepancies in cost can differ from setup to setup in more ways than you can imagine. Variables such as insulation, greenhouse materials, electricity rates, weather, the time of year, aspect and orientation, airflow, and of course the biggie, your zone and climate. Even in the dead of winter in a low zone, a greenhouse can heat up to tropical levels on a sunny day. But at night, with the wind howling and the temperatures below freezing, the heater is gonna be working overtime. For that, I'm gonna use both the indirect radiation from the lights we install, as well as my trusty oil-filled electric radiator here. I've been using this heater for over a decade, and it's never failed me. I've also gone ahead and spliced into the main cord a programmable thermostat. This is going to allow us to control the temperatures much more accurately. To calculate the cost on a typical winter day is never going to be an exact science. I can, however, guesstimate using the worst case scenario, running this thing full blast 24/7. That part is easy. In fact, let's go ahead and do it now. For this, we have several options. Yes, we could rely on the manufacturer's specifications, but I find those spotty at best. We could also purchase what's called a kilowatt meter or something similar, and those do work great. But even better for us here today is to use the Bluetti power station to calculate exactly how much power we need to use. I already have a Bluetti 268 watt power station, and it's great, but it does have its limitations. This guy caps out at about 600 watts output, and even that, it can only do for about half an hour. As most of the heaters use 1,000 watts or more, all this thing is going to do is trip its breaker. We need to go bigger. Bluetti reached out to me originally to sponsor a video, which I don't really do anymore. I did, however, tell them that if they sent me a unit, I would be more than happy to feature it, test it, rough it up a little bit, and of course give my thoughts on it. So here goes. The talking points of the Elite 200 V2 are as follows. It has a little over 2,000 watts capacity with a max output of 2,600 watts. A normal household circuit is capped at about 1,650 watts, so this little box packs a punch. Designed for camping, off-grid use, and home backup power, the Elite 200 V2 can literally power all your devices and has a claimed durability rating exceeding 17 years. It has both DC output for USB charging, etc., as well as the AC outlets for everything else. AC, or alternate current, is what we're after here today, so let's go ahead and get this guy going. Let's plug the heater in, crank it up all the way, and see what max usage really is. The heater may look old and run down, but it's served me well for over 10 years, so I'm gonna stick with it. Like most oil-filled heaters, it has 3 power settings. I'm gonna rely on the external thermostat, so I'm gonna turn this unit to the max. Turning on the Bluetti power station lights up and reveals the info-packed LCD display. Next, I need to turn on the AC to power up the heater. AC is on, but nothing's happening. Actually, that's to be expected, because once powered off, thermostats almost always reset themselves to a lower setting. So, if I go ahead and crank up my thermostat to its highest setting, 27 degrees Celsius, I should get power to the heater. There, that did the trick. The LCD panel on the thermostat indicates that it's now heating up. Let's go ahead and check the power station to see just how much electricity we're using. All right, it looks like this heater has a max usage of about 1,400 watts. Running it for 24 hours a day full tilt is going to use about 34 kilowatts. At 10 cents a kilowatt hour for my electrical rate, this is going to cost me about $3.40 a day. Probably a little over $100 a month. Now that's a lot of money. Of course though, that's not how heaters really work. There'll be some super sunny days where the heater doesn't turn on at all, and when it does, once it reaches that threshold temperature, it'll turn off. The difference between a thermostat's set temperature and the actual on-off temperature is known as its deadband, or hysteresis. It's not uncommon for this range to be 2 or even 3 degrees. Too low, and the thermostat triggers the heater to turn on. Too high though, and the thermostat cuts off all the power. As my greenhouse stabilizes between these two ranges, that's when my heater will be running at its most efficient. Now, what that looks like is going to be impossible to know for sure because of the variables we listed earlier, but at least now we know a max worst case scenario for the heat at least. What we also know is that it's not going to be free. Insulation matters, as does restricting the airflow and keeping the doors and vents closed on the coldest days. We still have a lot of work ahead of us, however, with all of the cleaning and organizing first, followed by figuring out that lighting. Both of those things are going to be no small feat. Fun stuff though, and it'll be exciting to finally move out the seedlings from their cramped quarters indoors out to the greenhouse. More natural and intense light early on, cooler nighttime temperatures, and infinitely more space to work with. It's going to make the annual hardening off process that much easier and that much more efficient. I built this greenhouse from scratch over 12 years ago, and I'm just now realizing how much shelf space I included in the plans. Finally getting to actually utilize it is a dream come true. First things first though. Yes, we did get the power set up and that's great, but we've got to get the greenhouse into working order so that we can then figure out our lighting system. That's going to be the focus of video 2. Should be a good one.